one of the most common things I get asked about my teacher business is how much money is realistic to earn by selling teaching resources online. So a lot of different people have got very different opinions about this. Some people think that it's quite an easy passive income selling teaching resources. Other people maybe feel that the market's a little bit too saturated. In this video, I thought it'd be really useful to break down like what's realistic to expect if you're wanting to go ahead and start selling your teaching resources online, what different things can affect how much you earn, how everybody's journey is a little bit different, and what my own experience has been and what I've kind of learned along the way as well. So hi, if you're new here, my name is Gemma and I run my teaching, I don't even really know what to call it. It's a bit of a mixture of everything. I have a Teachers Pay Teachers store. I also sell teaching resources in other places called Crayon Teach. I've been doing it for I think over 6 years now. So I thought it'd be useful to share my experiences and different things that I've learned along the way when I've been building my business. When people ask what is a realistic amount that you can earn from selling teaching resources online, it's actually quite a difficult question because there are so many different things that can affect this. So down to the actual basics of what you're selling, so what your niche is, what age range your teaching resources are for. For me, I sell younger teaching resources, so like ages 5, 6, 7, I suppose that's called lower elementary if we're talking about American terms, or like primary 1, 2, 3 if we're talking about Scottish schools. But and obviously that is quite a saturated market, so there is quite a lot of other people that are selling resources in that area. But if you've got a really niche area or a niche age range, you might actually earn a little bit more. Another thing to think about is how many resources you actually have made in your store. So obviously somebody who's maybe selling 10 resources and has created 10 resources, listed them to sell online somewhere, is obviously going to be making potentially less than somebody who's selling 50 resources. So that's something else that you need to think about. And also the quality of the resources. And I don't just mean that you're selling, I don't mean obviously that people are selling bad resources. I mean, are your resources really in depth? So if they're really in depth, they've got a lot of additional sections to them, maybe additional activities and things like that, those kind of resources might sell a bit better than just a sort of straightforward one activity, obviously, because there's a bit more to them. Another thing to think about is where you're selling your resources. So I mentioned before that I have a Teachers Pay Teachers store, but there are other places that you can sell your resources. So there is a UK website which is very similar called Tess. Some people even sell the resources on Etsy, depending on if they're relevant to that kind of audience. You might sell them on your own website, and there are many other websites as well. Like I want to say there's one called Made by Teachers and Classful, I want to say. Don't quote me on that, but there's definitely a few other ones, but I find they're not quite as big as, say, Teachers Pay Teachers for getting traffic. So not to say that they won't be in the future, but for now, I think they're still quite new. So that's obviously going to affect how much you can earn as well as where you're selling them. And obviously how much you might be marketing your resources. So you might just be somebody who lists it somewhere, wherever you're selling it, and then you just leave it and leave that website to kind of obviously do its thing and for you to rank in the search and stuff. Or you might be somebody who might like doing a bit of marketing, so maybe sharing your resources on Instagram, YouTube, Pinterest, email list, all that kind of stuff. So that's obviously going to affect how much you earn as well. So now we're going to talk about what it's actually like when you start selling your teaching resources. So obviously everyone's experience is a little bit different. However, I do feel the majority of us have a very similar experience where your first few sales or even your first sale is actually very slow, and it can take a little while to get a bit of traction. Now, from my own experience, I think I was actually really lucky because I opened my store in January 2020, and we all know what happened by March that same year. I think in some ways it hindered my store because it meant that obviously people weren't interested in buying real sort of hands-on resources because we weren't allowed to really use those, they weren't suitable. However, I was able to adapt a lot of my resources so they were suitable to use online, and then it became that a lot of people were looking for things that they could send home, packs to send home to their kids and things like that. So then I definitely got a big boost there. And I also had I was on my computer a lot more because of COVID, so I had a lot more opportunity to develop resources, design things, and yeah, I do think that definitely accounted for my sort of initial growth. And I also had one pin because I started pinning my resources on Pinterest, and I also had one pin which for me went quite viral, and I do think that accounted for a lot of traffic to my store. And just to point out as well, that pin went viral obviously 6 years ago, and I'm still getting traffic from that pin for that product and just general traffic for that product. So because Pinterest drove a lot of traffic to that product, it meant that product got bumped up the rankings on Teachers Pay Teachers, so it's kind of like a domino effect. So that's just to show that I do think, like later on maybe we talk a bit more about Pinterest, then that's sort of like, to me, evidence that doing Pinterest is definitely worth it. Not saying that every single pin is going to go viral, but you may get quite lucky, and even just if your pin just gets a little bit more traffic, it's very long term. It's not like Instagram where you post something and after say a day or two it's kind of like meaningless. So another thing to think about when you're a beginner is, as I said, your first few sales are usually quite slow. I want to say the first month, for me, I think I earned like $40 or something, so which I actually thought was pretty good. Like I wasn't really expecting very much at all. You know, you're not going to be earning thousands immediately. It is definitely a long process, a long game, and it's all about understanding, you know, what products sell well for you, what products your customers are going to be interested in, and obviously you getting practice at making good quality products, making products that, you know, are interesting, engaging, as I said, good quality, covering all the things that you're wanting them to teach. And it takes time, obviously, to do all that, and that's totally fine. So don't let that hold you back. Posting something, just because it's not perfect, you can always come back and add to it. And that's something that I've been doing with my store, is I have been going back to older resources and improving them, making them a bit better, adding to them. And yeah, it's just something, it's always going to be an ongoing process. And obviously, when you do open your store, you're not going to have very many resources, and it takes time to build up your first, 10, 20, 30, so on resources, and that's totally fine. So now we're going to talk about the sort of different levels of earnings that you may be earning, okay, or that you may sort of aim to earn for. And again, this is completely your own preference, and everybody's going to be happy with different levels depending on, I suppose, how much work you want to put in. So the first kind of level I would say is kind of like just doing it as a bit of a hobby, a bit of a side kind of thing that you do sort of more out of fun and out of something that you just enjoy doing it. And you might only have a few resources in your store, maybe I don't know, 20, 30, like less than 50. You might be obviously using the resources that you've already got in your classroom, just adapting a little bit and then popping them up. And this kind of like hobby income is really good for if you are wanting just a bit of extra money to maybe buy yourself a coffee, or to, maybe put aside maybe as like spending money, over the year if you're going to go away on holiday, or even just covering if you are wanting to maybe buy bits and bobs for your classroom, or, things like that. So just, little bits of money here and there that definitely help. To achieve that, I'd probably say you don't need an awful lot of resources. You probably won't need to worry about marketing too much, unless you want to. And it's just something that you can kind of add to your, your resources, create resources just kind of as and when you feel inspired and when you want to. So the next level of income that you maybe want to be aiming for is as a proper like side income. So this could be where you are earning hundreds a month. So hundreds of dollars a month, and it's the amount of money that you can, use to put aside to potentially save up for a holiday, maybe save up for if you're wanting to buy bits and bobs for your house, like new furniture, things like that, and maybe even, putting money aside to actually help with monthly bills. So you're wanting to maybe earn enough so that your food bill is covered for the entire month, or your, petrol bill isn't covered, or your gas or electric bill is covered for the entire month. So that would probably put you into like the proper side, and like a proper side income, almost like a second job. As I said, a few hundred per month. And to do that, you definitely would need more resources. I'm not saying a particular number. For me, I noticed a big jump in my earnings, and I know this is a bit of a Teachers Pay Teachers myth, but it is true for me. Once I hit around 50 resources, I did notice a big shift in my income. And I'm not saying that it was instant, because it wasn't, but it was not long after I hit that number, I did notice that, there was a big increase in my overall earnings. Don't know why, I think it was a bit of a coincidence really, but yeah, that is something that I did notice. So I do think to be earning a few hundred a month, you do need a good number of good quality resources, or if you have been very lucky that maybe your fewer resources have just been really popular, or they're very niche and they're really popular, then obviously that will kind of put you into that bracket. And then our next level of potential income is obviously treating it as a serious business. And that's not saying that when you've been working with a bit of a side income, you haven't been treating it as a serious business, but this is where you could be looking at earning, thousands per month. It could replace, like maybe you can potentially reduce your hours teaching or even replace your hours teaching if that is something that you are looking for. And usually to achieve this kind of level, you would need to be not only creating new resources, quite regularly. I'm not saying churning out poor quality resources, but definitely being quite regular with releasing new content, new resources to your store, but really looking at some sort of marketing for your store as well. So you probably, you might be doing an email list, you might be using Pinterest, you might be using Instagram, YouTube, whatever it is that you fancy, whatever it is that you feel more inclined to do. Usually to achieve, having it as a serious business, earning, over 1,000 into the thousands per month, that is kind of where you that's what you kind of be looking to do, is definitely be looking at marketing a bit more. Again, I know there are stores out there who don't have to do this, and they've been very, obviously, they've just been able to achieve that from whatever resources they create and putting them on Teachers Pay Teachers or whatever website it is that they use. And, obviously their resources that they're creating are obviously very in demand, which, is fantastic. So if you can do that without having to market, that would be amazing. But I think for the vast majority of us, we do need a little bit of help getting eyes on our resources, and that is usually done through different, ways of marketing. So now we're going to talk about the types of things that actually determine your earnings. So I mentioned before about making sure that you're regularly creating products. So as I said before, this means, I don't mean like churning out, poor quality or trying to get them released as quickly as possible, but making sure that you do have fresh stuff in your stores. This is a bit of a mistake that I think I made. So I noticed my biggest growth when I was being very regular with creating new resources. I then decided, okay, I've been creating quite a lot of resources, I've got a good few hundred here, and I stopped creating resources altogether and kind of took my time updating things, checking the SEO, adding stuff, adding value to already, bestsellers, things like that, which are all really good tasks to do. However, I felt like I then leaned a little bit too much into that job and I totally neglected creating things. And I did notice that there was a bit of a plateau with my store when I did that. So what I've actually been doing this past year is I've been trying to get the balance a bit better. So updating things, looking at SEO and things like that, but also still making sure that I'm creating new resources, adding fresh things to my store. And I have to say, I have noticed a bit of an increase in not only my sales, but even just like the activity on my store, so views and things like that, preview views and things like that. So I definitely think that it's about getting the balance right and making sure that you not only have new stuff, but you're also not forgetting about the things you've already made, and especially if it's something that's a bestseller, because look at how to make that better. Go into it and think, right, okay, what can I add to this to make it better? And if it's something as well that is really valuable, and just say you do add quite a lot to it, you can even up the price a little bit. And if it's something that's already getting a lot of views, a lot of interest, and especially if you've added to it, I don't think people will have a problem paying that little bit more. So yeah, it's just about getting the balance of new versus like not forgetting about the things that you've already made. So another thing that will help determine how much money you actually earn, this is something else I'm a little bit guilty of, is making sure that you are making quite a good number of evergreen resources. So this is resources that can be used all year round. Now don't get me wrong, I love seasonal stuff. And I have to say that a big chunk of my store right now, which is something that I'm currently trying to fix, a big chunk of my store is seasonal resources. Like I have a lot of autumn, fall, winter, Christmas, spring resources, especially things that I know are best sellers. I do try and make them in different seasons or different, occasions and stuff like that, because I know they'll sell. But fair enough, they'll sell for that month or those few weeks or even season, but then the rest of the year they don't sell. And unless you get the occasional random person buying like a Halloween thing in February, which I have had, which is so funny. In fact, actually, I think the other day somebody bought a Christmas thing and it's July, but whatever. So yeah, it does happen, but usually it doesn't. So you're kind of limiting yourself a little bit if you make too many seasonal things. So yeah, it's about, don't neglect evergreen stuff. Really try and think about what evergreen things you can have in your store. And that is something that I'm currently working on just now, is a lot of the new things that I'm making just now are evergreen. And I'm hoping that they will, obviously gain traction and obviously be available, be suitable all year round. I do feel like evergreen resources though, sometimes they can take a little while to get popular and take off, but then when they do, it's amazing because obviously they can sell all year round. So I definitely think having a good number of evergreen resources is something that will help increase your earnings. So another thing to consider when you are trying to think about how to really, increase your earnings is creating an email list. I think I did mention that earlier when we spoke about like marketing and stuff. So an email list can seem a little bit daunting to start, but once you've got it started, it's fantastic. And it's something that you can set up, and maybe set up a free thing that people sign up for, and you don't even have to start sending out emails right away. You can kind of give yourself a little bit of breathing room, get people signed up, and then when you're ready, you can start sending out weekly or monthly or whatever emails. So and the good thing about your email list is those people's emails and contacts are yours. They're not like on a Etsy site or a TPT site or whatever. They're actually yours, so you have a lot more control over how you market to them and things like that. And it's just, it's something that you have just like a little bit more ownership with. And then it's the same as well if you wanted to venture into having your own website. So you could set up your own online store. Obviously that's a whole other thing, and it is quite a big, task. But if you did want to do it, again, it's something that you would have ownership over and you would have complete control. And the last thing that I kind of want to mention about helping people you make as much as you possibly can is being consistent. So it's like anything, it's quite tricky to stay consistent, especially when you're maybe not seeing the results right away, or it's taking a little time to see very much results. I think a lot of people do quit maybe quite early. They're not really seeing, what they want to see, them not really seeing the earnings. And I do feel like, I think this is actually I think I've heard this being spoken about when you're when you're trying to build up like a YouTube channel. So I do have another YouTube channel for another business that I run with my fiance, and we've been posting on that YouTube channel for a year now. And we've not missed 1 week. We've had a week, every single week we've had a video going out. And I felt like, it was coming up to the year, and I was thinking, gosh, this is taking so long to really get consistent views. Like, don't get me wrong, I had a couple of videos that, did a bit better than our usual videos, but most of our videos were getting like less than 100 views, sometimes less than 50. And then all of a sudden, and it does happen sometimes quite suddenly, all of a sudden it's like everything that we'd been doing had all accumulated, and now our videos are getting quite consistently good number of views. And the thing that I have actually noticed is we've been getting a lot of engagement, as in comments, whereas before we were getting nothing. So it just shows that your growth isn't always like a steady line like that. Sometimes it could feel like you're kind of going along this plateau, nothing, then all of a sudden there's this big growth jump. So I just think you never know when that's going to happen. So I think that is something to keep in mind if you're ever thinking about giving up, or if you're ever thinking, oh, my sales aren't where I want them to be, not really seeing much difference here. Keep that in mind, that like your your achievements, your success, your growth isn't always just like in a straight line. It can almost like take you a bit by surprise. So next I wanted to talk about a few things that maybe people don't really tell you when you are starting to think about selling your teaching resources. So you may see a lot of people saying that selling things online, not just teaching resources, but anything online is quite a passive income. I'm kind of hoping it is starting to turn a little bit now. I have seen a lot of chat about how selling anything online isn't actually passive, and I would definitely say that selling teaching resources falls into that category. Don't get me wrong, you can make it kind of semi-passive, as in you do all the work or most of the work up front, upload your stuff, and you can kind of leave it for a little bit. But as I mentioned before, it is good to go back and update things that you've created. You might want to add things to them, you might want to market them to get more eyes on them, and then there's also customers maybe asking questions and things. Obviously with the likes of TPT, Teachers for Teachers, there's some questions and stuff like that get directed to them. You don't really have to deal with it, like especially if it's like a refund or something like that. Another thing that maybe people don't tell you is that either learning business skills or having business skills definitely will help. So this is things like knowing a little bit about marketing, knowing a little bit about SEO, so using keywords and things when you're naming your resources or listing your resources, and being able to maybe learn or know a little bit about using the likes of Pinterest, email marketing. And I know that this is maybe not the best thing, especially if it's not really your thing, is a little bit about content creation. So this could be using the likes of Instagram and TikTok and things like that to promote your resources. But you don't have to do it that way. If you want to do something a little bit different, you could be making like YouTube videos, you could be writing blog posts that promote your resources. There's so many different ways that you can do it now that, it's not just about posting things on Instagram. So, but I do think that that is something that at some point you probably will want to do, to try and get, I'm saying will want to do, a lot of people probably don't want to do it, but you might need to do a little bit just to kind of get more eyes on your resources and to get your store out there. So that is just something that I kind of wanted to mention, and it does make a difference when it comes to, obviously increasing your earnings. And then another thing as well that maybe people don't want to kind of be a bit honest about is that it takes time. So it will look different for very different people. Some people will get quite a bit of success with selling their resources within a few weeks or a few months. Some people, it could take over a year or even longer. It just totally depends on, all the things that we've kind of mentioned before. So just to be prepared for that, is that it is, it will take a bit of time, and you might need to be prepared for putting quite a lot of work in up front and maybe not seeing that much of a result for quite a while. Now I want to talk about a few things that I would do if I was starting my new store like today. So one of the things that I would do is I would stick with one kind of like age group or grade level or whatever. So I did do that for most part. However, there was a few things that I did try out for younger students and older students, and I do kind of wish that I just hadn't wasted my time with that. Don't get me wrong, if you're not quite sure, definitely take time trying out different things. But once you've picked your age group or your grade level or whatever, pretty much stick with that, because it'll just mean that you can go more in depth in creating your resources, and all your things will be very cohesive and it won't confuse customers and things. So another thing that I would do probably more of, but then again I think this is because of when I started, it was very, as I said, it was during COVID. For me personally, I would start creating a lot of quite hands-on resources, so things that are a bit more, that you can manipulate a bit more, so things that can be cut out, things that can be cut out and made, maybe games, board games, matching games, pairs, matching cards, jigsaw type things, all sort of more hands-on and things that students maybe need to manipulate a bit more. And there's a couple of reasons for this. First of all, I do feel like it's a bit more engaging for the students. Obviously a little bit more fun if it's like game-like, things like that. And I feel like these resources are also less likely to be copied by AI. So this is something that, is obviously going to be a constant thought when you are creating stuff. Probably is, can AI just copy this? So if you're creating quite a basic worksheet, chances are, if not already, AI probably could copy it or create something very similar. Whereas if it's something that's more of a game or something that's more open-ended as well, so things like projects that are a bit more open-ended, where students have to think up their own ideas for things like designing projects, even things like escape rooms and stuff like that. I'm not saying that they can't be copied by AI, but they're less likely, and obviously on top of that they are more engaging and fun for the kids. So that is something that I personally probably would have done a lot more of from the get-go, is made more hands-on stuff, making sure that your resources as well meet obviously the certain areas of the curriculum. So making sure that you're looking at the standards, or whatever it is you're looking at the curriculum, and making sure that your resources are ticking those things off. So then your teachers are actually finding them useful in their classroom. Another thing that I'd probably try and do is start my email list a bit sooner. So I did actually start mine not too far into having my store. I want to say a year into having my store, but I do actually kind of wish I'd started it even sooner, because obviously it takes a little bit of time to get people on your email list. So definitely, even if you're not sending emails, with it, but definitely start building it as soon as you can. That would definitely be something that I would advise to do. And another thing, kind of going back to what I said before, is just making sure that you're consistently creating new resources. So what I mean, I don't mean by churning out a new resource one a week or anything like that, but just making sure that over the year you are, regularly uploading new things to your store, so there are fresh, resources being added to your store. It looks like your store's active, obviously, for customers coming to see it, and for TPT, because obviously it helps, with getting it pushed in search. And not just for TPT, if you're selling on your own website as well, obviously it's good if you're adding new things to your store, and the same if you're using tests and things like that. So yeah, trying to be as consistent as you can, whatever that looks like. So even though what we've been speaking about in this video has obviously been about how much you can actually, what the different opportunities are for what you can earn by selling your teaching resources, for me, a big thing that I got from doing this has actually been, a bit of freedom. So I'm actually able to travel and things like that, like still work online, because I can work from wherever in the world, and that has opened up so many opportunities for me. And for me, that's worth a lot more than money. Obviously, don't get me wrong, I'm currently still trying to build my store, and there's a few of these things that I've mentioned that I am making changes to my store just now, because I do want my store to continue to grow. So yeah, and I'm hoping I can share some of the new things that I do try out, and obviously share how they get on. So if you found this video useful or interesting, make sure and subscribe, and make sure and turn the notification bell for my future videos, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye!